What if I told you that one man conquered most of the known world before reaching the age of 33? Not a myth, not a legend created centuries later, a real king whose victories changed the course of history forever. His name was Alexander, and history remembers him as Alexander the Great. But before he became a legend, before entire empires feared his arrival, he was simply a young prince growing up in a kingdom that few expected would dominate the ancient world. Imagine standing on a battlefield before sunrise. Thousands of soldiers wait in silence. Horses stamp nervously against the earth. Armor rattles softly in the darkness. Every man knows that when the battle begins, many will never see home again. Then a young king rides forward, not behind his army, not from a safe distance. At the very front, that was Alexander. He believed a leader should face the same dangers as his men. That courage earned loyalty from his soldiers and fear from his enemies. Yet courage alone does not explain Alexander. What truly drove him was ambition. An ambition so powerful that it would eventually carry him across continents. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Macedon, a kingdom north of Greece. His father, King Philip II, was one of the greatest military leaders of his era. Through discipline, reform, and strategy, Philip transformed Macedon into a rising power capable of challenging its rivals. From his father, Alexander learned warfare. From his mother, Olympias, he learned something equally powerful, the belief that he was destined for greatness. She filled his childhood with stories of heroes, destiny, and extraordinary achievements. Whether those stories were true mattered less than the effect they had on him. Alexander grew up believing that his life had a purpose larger than ordinary kingship. Among all the heroes he admired, one stood above the rest: Achilles, the legendary warrior of the Trojan War. Achilles won eternal fame through courage and sacrifice. His name survived long after his death. Alexander wanted the same. He did not simply want power, he wanted immortality through history. At 13, he became a student of Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied politics, science, geography, literature, and medicine. His education was exceptional. But books alone could never satisfy him. He wanted action. He wanted achievement. He wanted glory. As a teenager, he joined military campaigns and witnessed war firsthand. He learned how victories were won and how quickly fortunes could change on the battlefield. Every lesson prepared him for a moment that arrived sooner than anyone expected. In 336 BC, King Philip II was assassinated during a public celebration. Suddenly, the future of Macedon became uncertain. Alexander was only 20 years old. Many believed he was too young to rule. Enemies sensed weakness. Rivals began plotting. Across Greece, rebellious voices started to emerge. The kingdom stood dangerously close to chaos. But instead of collapsing under pressure, Alexander moved with astonishing speed. He secured the throne, crushed opposition, silenced challengers, and re-established control before his enemies could unite against him. Within months, the young king had proven that he was far more capable than anyone imagined. Yet ruling Macedon was never enough. Beyond the sea stood the Persian Empire, the wealthiest empire in the world. The largest empire in the world, the most powerful empire of its age. Most rulers would have considered such a challenge impossible. Alexander saw something else: opportunity, destiny, a chance to achieve the greatness he had dreamed about since childhood. Soon he would lead his army eastward, and the world would never be the same again. Alexander's dream was enormous, but dreams mean nothing without action. In the spring of 334 BC, the young king made a decision that would change history forever. He gathered his army, crossed the Hellespont, and entered Asia. Behind him lay Macedonia. Ahead of him stood the Persian Empire. At the time, Persia was the greatest superpower on Earth. Its territory stretched across 3 continents. Its wealth seemed endless. Its armies outnumbered nearly every opponent they faced. By comparison, Alexander's force looked small. Many believed his invasion was reckless. Some believed it was suicidal. But Alexander understood something that many rulers never learn. Wars are not won by numbers alone. They are won by leadership, discipline, timing, and belief. The moment he stepped onto Asian soil, Alexander reportedly threw a spear into the ground and claimed the continent as a gift won by conquest. Whether the story is true or not, it perfectly captures his mindset. He did not arrive as a visitor. He arrived as a conqueror. His first major challenge came at the Granicus River. Persian commanders positioned their forces along the opposite bank, expecting the river itself to slow the Macedonian advance. The current was strong, the terrain was difficult. Attacking directly would be extremely dangerous. Many experienced generals advised caution. Alexander chose the opposite. He attacked. The battle erupted in chaos. Horses struggled through rushing water. Spears collided. Soldiers fought at close range as the river became a deadly battlefield. Alexander placed himself in the center of the fighting. As always, he refused to ask his men to face risks he would not face himself. At one critical moment, disaster nearly struck. An enemy warrior broke through the fighting and attacked Alexander directly. The king came within seconds of death before one of his companions intervened and killed the attacker. One swing of a weapon, one missed opportunity, one different outcome. Instead, Alexander survived. And Persia suffered a humiliating defeat. The victory at Granicus sent shockwaves across the region. Cities began surrendering. Local rulers started questioning Persian authority. For the first time, people realized that the mighty Persian Empire could actually be challenged. Alexander moved quickly. He understood that momentum was one of the most powerful weapons in warfare. Every victory increased his reputation. Every conquered city strengthened his position. Every successful campaign attracted new supporters. Soon, what had once seemed impossible began to look achievable. Yet Alexander knew the real challenge still waited ahead, because the men he had defeated so far were not the true rulers of Persia. Far to the east sat King Darius III, the ruler of the Persian Empire, the most powerful monarch in the world. Darius watched the Macedonian advance with growing concern. Reports of Alexander's victories arrived one after another. Cities were falling, governors were retreating. Confidence was beginning to crack. But Darius still possessed immense resources. He could raise massive armies. He controlled vast territories. He commanded wealth beyond imagination. Most importantly, he believed that one decisive battle would end the invasion forever. Alexander wanted that battle. In fact, he welcomed it. Because defeating local commanders could earn victories. But defeating Darius could earn immortality. As the Macedonian army pushed deeper into Persian territory, anticipation grew across the ancient world. Two rulers were moving toward the same destiny. One ruled the largest empire on earth. The other carried the ambition to take it. Soon they would meet, and when they did, history itself would stand on the battlefield beside them. The clash between Alexander and Darius was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. After securing much of Asia Minor, Alexander continued advancing deeper into Persian territory. Every victory strengthened his reputation. Every conquered city weakened Persian influence. Across the ancient world, stories of the young Macedonian king spread rapidly. Some called him fearless, others called him reckless. But nobody could ignore him anymore. Far to the east, King Darius III watched with growing concern. He ruled the largest empire on earth, an empire built through generations of conquest, wealth, and military power. For years, Persia had dominated the ancient world without serious challenge. Now that dominance was under threat, Darius understood that Alexander could not be allowed to continue advancing. The longer the Macedonian remained undefeated, the stronger his reputation would become. Eventually, the Persian king decided to take personal command of the war. In 333 BC, the two rulers finally moved toward a confrontation near Issus. The battlefield itself would play a crucial role. Mountains rose on one side. The sea stretched along the other. The narrow terrain limited Persia's greatest advantage: numbers. Alexander immediately recognized the opportunity. His army was smaller, but it was highly trained, disciplined, and loyal. Years of preparation had transformed Macedonian soldiers into one of the most effective fighting forces in the world. When the battle began, the field exploded into chaos. Thousands of men surged forward. Spears collided, shields crashed together. War cries echoed across the valley. Dust filled the air as cavalry and infantry fought for survival. As always, Alexander placed himself near the front. He believed leadership required personal risk. His soldiers could see him fighting beside them, and that visibility inspired confidence even during the fiercest moments of combat. But Alexander's goal extended beyond defeating Persian soldiers. He wanted Darius. He understood that armies often follow the confidence of their leader. If he could break the Persian king's resolve, the entire army might collapse. The Macedonian attack intensified. Alexander and his cavalry pushed toward the Persian center. And closer still, around them, thousands fought desperately, but the attention of history seemed focused on two men. One ruled the greatest empire in the world, the other intended to take it. Then came the decisive moment. Darius saw the attack approaching. He saw the danger growing, and he made a choice that would define his legacy. He fled. The King of Kings abandoned the battlefield. The effect was immediate. Persian soldiers who witnessed their ruler retreat began losing confidence. Confusion spread quickly through the ranks. Units that had fought bravely moments earlier started breaking apart. Soon, confusion became panic. The Persian line collapsed. Alexander had won. The victory was far more than a military success. It was a psychological earthquake. For generations, Persia had appeared invincible. Now the world had witnessed its ruler fleeing before a young conqueror from Macedon. When the fighting ended, Alexander captured enormous wealth, military supplies, and members of Darius's own family. His fame grew dramatically. He was no longer seen merely as a successful king. He was becoming a legend. Yet victory carried its own dangers. Each success increased Alexander's confidence. Each triumph strengthened his belief in destiny. The more he won, the harder it became to imagine failure. For now that confidence fueled his rise. But the line between confidence and overconfidence is often thinner than it appears. Alexander continued marching forward. The Persian Empire had been humiliated, but it was not yet defeated, and the greatest chapters of his story were still waiting ahead. After the victory at Issus, Alexander faced an important choice. He could pursue Darius immediately and attempt to end the war in a single stroke, or he could secure the territories that remained vulnerable behind him. Alexander chose patience. For a man famous for bold risks, it was a surprisingly calculated decision. He turned south and advanced along the eastern Mediterranean coast, targeting cities that still supported Persian control. These ports were strategically vital. As long as Persia controlled them, Alexander's supply lines remained vulnerable. One by one, cities surrendered. Others resisted. The most famous resistance came from Tyre. Tyre was unlike any city Alexander had faced before. It sat on an island just offshore, protected by strong walls and surrounded by the sea. Many believed it was impossible to conquer. Alexander disagreed. The siege became one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. His soldiers built a massive causeway stretching from the mainland toward the island. Day after day, under constant attack, they pushed forward. The defenders fought fiercely. The sea itself seemed determined to stop the Macedonians. Storms damaged construction. Enemy ships launched attacks. Progress was painfully slow. Yet Alexander refused to abandon the siege. Months passed. The project consumed enormous resources. Many commanders might have moved on. Alexander became even more determined. For him, the issue was no longer military. It had become personal. Eventually, the causeway reached the city. Macedonian forces stormed Tyre. After months of resistance, the city fell. The victory sent another powerful message across the region. No fortress was beyond Alexander's reach. No obstacle was truly impossible. With the coast secured, he continued south into Egypt. What happened there surprised everyone. Unlike many regions that had resisted fiercely, Egypt welcomed Alexander. The Egyptians had grown tired of Persian rule. To them, Alexander did not arrive as an oppressor. He arrived as a liberator. Cities opened their gates. Priests greeted him with respect. Crowds celebrated his arrival. For perhaps the first time during his campaign, Alexander entered a major land not through destruction, but through acceptance. The experience had a profound effect on him. In Egypt, he founded a city that would carry his name forever, Alexandria. At the time, it was simply another ambitious project. Later, it would become one of the most important cities of the ancient world, a center of trade, knowledge, science, and culture. Even today, its name remains connected to the legacy of Alexander. But Egypt offered him something even more powerful than a city. It offered validation. During his journey, Alexander visited the Oracle of Siwa, a sacred site deep within the desert. Ancient sources disagree about exactly what happened there. Some accounts claim the priest greeted him as the son of a god. Others suggest the meeting was more symbolic. The truth may never be known. What matters is how Alexander interpreted the experience. Throughout his life, he had been told he was destined for greatness. Now, in Egypt, that belief seemed stronger than ever. The line between confidence and destiny began to blur. And perhaps for the first time, Alexander started seeing himself as more than a king, more than a conqueror, something greater, something chosen. Meanwhile, Darius remained alive. The Persian Empire still existed, and the greatest battle of Alexander's life was still ahead. The final struggle for control of the ancient world was approaching. Soon, the fate of Persia would be decided, and Alexander would either become the greatest conqueror of his age or lose everything he had fought to build. After Egypt, Alexander stood at the height of success. Everywhere he went, victories followed. Cities surrendered. Enemies retreated. His name spread farther than ever before. Yet for Alexander, success was never enough. The more he achieved, the more ambitious he became. In Egypt, he founded a city that would carry his name for centuries, Alexandria. What began as a strategic settlement would eventually become one of the most important centers of learning, trade, and culture in the ancient world. But Alexander was already looking beyond it. His attention remained fixed on Persia. King Darius III was still alive. The Persian Empire still existed. And as long as that remained true, Alexander believed his mission was unfinished. While Alexander prepared for the next stage of the campaign, Darius was doing the same. The Persian king understood that another defeat could destroy everything he ruled. This time he intended to gather the largest army possible. From across the empire came soldiers, cavalry, archers, and warriors from distant lands. Darius assembled a force designed to overwhelm the Macedonians through sheer size. The final confrontation was approaching. In 331 BC, the two armies met near a place called Gaugamela. Unlike Issus, this battlefield favored Persia. The land was wide and open, perfect for cavalry, perfect for large formations, perfect for the enormous army Darius had assembled. Many believed Alexander had finally met an opponent he could not defeat. The odds appeared overwhelming. But Alexander had spent his entire life succeeding where others expected failure. Before the battle, he carefully studied the terrain and enemy positions. While Darius relied on numbers, Alexander relied on planning, discipline, and flexibility. When dawn arrived, thousands of soldiers prepared for what would become one of history's most famous battles. The Persian army stretched across the horizon. It seemed endless. To many soldiers, the sight must have been terrifying. Yet Alexander remained calm. He had faced impossible odds before. The battle began with movement rather than chaos. Alexander advanced carefully, forcing Persian forces to react. Darius attempted to use his numerical advantage to surround the Macedonians, but Alexander anticipated the maneuver. As gaps appeared within the Persian formation, he saw an opportunity, and he acted immediately. Leading his elite cavalry, Alexander drove directly toward the center of the Persian line. The attack was fast, precise, devastating. For a brief moment, the entire battle focused on a single objective: reach Darius, just as he had done at Issus. The Persian king suddenly found himself facing the same nightmare once again. The Macedonian king was coming directly for him. As fighting intensified around the royal position, Darius faced a choice: stand and fight, or flee. History repeated itself. Darius fled. Once more, the ruler of Persia abandoned the battlefield. And once more, the consequences were catastrophic. The Persian army began collapsing. Units broke apart. Soldiers retreated. Resistance crumbled. The Battle of Gaugamela was over. Alexander had achieved the impossible. He had defeated the greatest empire in the world. For centuries, Persia had dominated the ancient landscape. Now it belonged to him. The road to Babylon lay open. The road to Persepolis lay open. The treasures of an empire lay before him. At just 25 years old, Alexander had accomplished more than most rulers achieve in a lifetime. But something strange was beginning to happen. Instead of satisfying his ambition, victory seemed to feed it. The larger his empire became, the farther his dreams extended. The horizon kept moving, and Alexander kept chasing it. The conquest of Persia should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was only the beginning of an even greater obsession. The victory at Gaugamela changed the ancient world forever. For years, Alexander had pursued a dream that many believed was impossible. He had crossed continents, defeated powerful armies, and challenged the greatest empire on earth. Now the Persian Empire was collapsing. The road to Babylon lay open. When Alexander entered the city, he found one of the richest and most famous places in the world. Massive walls surrounded crowded streets. Temples rose above the skyline. Wealth flowed through its markets from distant lands. Yet there was no great battle, no desperate resistance. Babylon surrendered. Its gates opened, and Alexander entered as a conqueror. For his soldiers, the city represented victory. Years of hardship had finally produced rewards beyond imagination. Gold, silver, supplies, and treasures filled the city. But Alexander was already looking ahead. He always was. Every victory pushed him toward another challenge. Every achievement created a new ambition. Soon, he marched toward Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia. More than a city, Persepolis was a symbol of imperial power. For generations, Persian kings had ruled from its magnificent palaces. When Alexander arrived, he stood at the heart of the empire he had spent years fighting to defeat. The achievement was extraordinary. Only a short time earlier, he had crossed into Asia with a relatively small army. Many expected him to fail. Instead, he had conquered the greatest empire in the world. Yet success brought an unexpected danger. The more Alexander won, the more difficult it became for him to imagine failure. Each victory strengthened his confidence. Each triumph reinforced the belief that destiny favored him. The young king who once chased glory was slowly becoming a man convinced that no obstacle could stop him. Then came one of the most controversial moments of his life, the burning of Persepolis. Ancient writers disagree about why it happened. Some described it as revenge for Persian attacks against Greece generations earlier. Others believed it was a deliberate message announcing the end of Persian rule. Whatever the reason, flames soon consumed parts of the city. Smoke filled the night sky. A powerful symbol of the Persian Empire disappeared in fire. Yet even after conquering Persepolis, Alexander felt his work was unfinished. One reason remained: Darius III. The Persian king was still alive. Defeated, but alive. As long as Darius remained free, Alexander believed the war was not truly over. So the pursuit continued. Across mountains and distant territories, he chased the fallen ruler eastward. The journey was difficult, but Alexander refused to stop. Then fate intervened. Before Alexander could capture him, Darius was betrayed by members of his own court. Abandoned during his escape, the former king was left mortally wounded. When Alexander finally reached him, it was too late. Darius was dead. The man who had once ruled the largest empire on earth died far from the glory of his throne. According to ancient accounts, Alexander ordered that Darius receive a burial worthy of a king. It was a gesture of respect toward a defeated enemy and perhaps a reminder of how fragile power could be. With Darius gone, Alexander became the undisputed ruler of the Persian Empire. His dream had become reality. He possessed immense wealth, vast territories, unmatched power. The goal that had once seemed impossible had finally been achieved. For many rulers, this would have been the perfect ending. A moment to celebrate, a moment to rest, a moment to enjoy victory. But Alexander was not like most rulers. Instead of feeling satisfied, he wanted more. The world seemed larger than ever, and somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, new lands awaited. Soon Alexander would begin marching again, not because he needed another empire, but because he no longer knew how to stop chasing greatness. With the Persian Empire under his control, Alexander had achieved what many believed was impossible. He was now the ruler of the largest empire in the known world. From Greece and Egypt to the heart of Persia, vast territories answered to his authority. Yet something inside him remained unsatisfied. For years, his ambition had been fueled by a single goal: defeat Persia. Now that goal was gone. Most rulers would have returned home. Most kings would have focused on governing the lands they had conquered. Alexander chose a different path. He continued east. The farther he traveled, the more difficult the campaign became. The lands beyond Persia were unfamiliar to many Macedonians. The terrain was harsh. Mountains blocked the horizon. Vast deserts tested endurance. Supply lines stretched farther than ever before. Still, Alexander pressed onward. His soldiers followed because they trusted him, because they believed in him, because victory had become a habit. But even the most loyal army has limits. As the years passed, many soldiers began wondering when the journey would finally end. They had left home long ago. Some had not seen their families in nearly a decade. Many had grown old on campaign. Many had buried friends along the way. Yet Alexander kept marching. Along the way, he founded new cities, many bearing his name. These settlements helped secure trade routes, spread Greek influence, and strengthen control over newly conquered territories. Alexander was no longer merely conquering lands. He was reshaping the map of the ancient world. At the same time, changes were occurring within Alexander himself. As ruler of the Persian Empire, he began adopting certain Persian customs and traditions. He wore elements of Persian royal clothing. He included Persian nobles in positions of authority. He encouraged cooperation between different cultures across his empire. Some viewed these actions as wise leadership. Others saw them as betrayal. Many Macedonian officers became uncomfortable. They had followed a Macedonian king. Now they watched him embrace aspects of the very empire they had fought to destroy. Tensions slowly grew. The gap between Alexander and some of his closest companions widened. For the first time, cracks began appearing beneath the surface of his success. Yet Alexander remained focused on a larger vision. He no longer saw himself as merely king of Macedon or conqueror of Persia. He imagined an empire that united East and West, an empire larger and more diverse than anything history had ever seen. It was an extraordinary vision, but extraordinary visions often require extraordinary sacrifices. The farther east Alexander traveled, the more resistance he encountered. Local rulers fought back, rebellions erupted. New enemies emerged from lands few Greeks had ever explored. Victory became harder. The campaigns became longer. The cost became greater. Yet Alexander refused to turn back. Each challenge only strengthened his determination. To his supporters, it was proof of greatness. To his critics, it was evidence of obsession. Perhaps both were true. By now, Alexander had spent most of his adult life at war. Conquest had become his purpose. Movement had become his identity. Stopping felt impossible. Ahead lay India, a land surrounded by stories, mystery, and enormous wealth. To Alexander, it was another horizon waiting to be reached. Another challenge demanding to be conquered. And so the army marched on, toward unfamiliar rivers, toward powerful kingdoms, toward battles unlike any they had fought before, toward the moment when even the loyalty of his legendary soldiers would finally be pushed to its breaking point. Because the greatest challenge Alexander would face was no longer an empire. It was the men who had followed him all the way there. By the time Alexander reached the lands of India, his army had already traveled farther than almost any force in ancient history. Years of marching, fighting, and conquering had transformed ordinary soldiers into hardened veterans. They had crossed deserts that seemed endless, climbed mountains that touched the clouds, faced enemies from cultures they had never imagined existed. And yet, Alexander still wanted more. To him, the edge of the world always seemed just beyond the next horizon. As the Macedonian army advanced deeper into India, they encountered powerful kingdoms unlike those they had faced before. The region was vast, rich, and fiercely independent. Local rulers had no intention of surrendering simply because Persia had fallen. Among these rulers was King Porus. Unlike many enemies who fled or submitted, Porus chose to fight. The confrontation would become one of the most famous battles of Alexander's career. The two armies met near the Hydaspes River in 326 BC. Nature itself seemed determined to make the battle difficult. Heavy rains had swollen the river, creating dangerous currents and muddy terrain. Crossing under enemy observation appeared nearly impossible. But Alexander had built his reputation on doing what others considered impossible. For days, he used deception to confuse Porus. Troops moved up and down the riverbanks. False preparations were made. Small detachments created uncertainty about where the real crossing would occur. Then, under cover of darkness and a violent storm, Alexander launched his move. His forces crossed the river and surprised the enemy. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Macedonians had experienced. For the first time, many of them faced war elephants in large numbers. The enormous animals towered above the battlefield. Their presence terrified horses and disrupted formations. To soldiers who had never encountered such creatures in combat, the sight was shocking. The fighting was brutal. Rain turned the ground into mud. Men struggled for footing. Elephants charged through lines of infantry. Cavalry clashed across the field. For hours, victory remained uncertain. Yet once again, Alexander's leadership made the difference. His army adapted. His commanders responded. His soldiers endured. Eventually, Porus was defeated. But what happened after the battle revealed another side of Alexander. When the captured king was brought before him, Alexander asked how he wished to be treated. Porus reportedly answered with a single response: "Like a king." The reply impressed Alexander. Instead of humiliating his defeated enemy, he restored Porus to power and allowed him to continue ruling under Macedonian authority. It was a decision that earned respect from both sides. The victory added another chapter to Alexander's growing legend. Yet beneath the celebration, a problem was emerging. His soldiers were exhausted. For years, they had followed him across the known world. They had fought countless battles, survived impossible hardships, and watched friends die far from home. Many no longer dreamed of conquest. They dreamed of returning home. Alexander, however, still looked east. He spoke of new lands, new kingdoms, new victories. The thought filled his men with dread. When the army reached the Hephaestus River, the tension finally erupted. The soldiers refused to go farther. For the first time in his career, Alexander faced an enemy he could not defeat with courage, strategy, or force: his own army. The men who had helped build his empire had reached their limit. They would march no farther. And for the first time since beginning his conquest, Alexander was forced to confront a reality he had spent years avoiding. Even the greatest conqueror in history could not conquer everything. The refusal at the Hephaestus River struck Alexander harder than any enemy attack. For years, his soldiers had followed him through impossible campaigns. They had crossed continents, faced overwhelming odds, and helped build an empire larger than anything they had ever imagined. Now they were saying no. Not to a battle, not to a difficult march, to Alexander himself. At first, he could hardly believe it. He gathered his commanders and argued that greater victories still awaited them. Beyond the horizon, he claimed, lay new kingdoms, new riches, and new opportunities for glory. The journey that had begun years earlier did not have to end here. But the men remained unmoved. They were exhausted. Many had spent nearly half their lives at war. Their armor was worn. Their bodies carried scars from countless battles. Their thoughts were no longer focused on conquest. They were focused on home. For several days, Alexander resisted. He hoped the army would change its mind. It never did. Eventually, the conqueror who had defeated empires was forced to accept reality. The campaign eastward was over. Reluctantly, he ordered the army to turn back. It was one of the few major decisions of his career that had not been entirely his own. The return journey, however, would prove almost as dangerous as the conquests themselves. Rather than simply retracing his path, Alexander chose routes that exposed his army to new challenges. Part of the force traveled by sea, while others marched across harsh territory. One of the most devastating stages of the return took place in the Gedrosian Desert. The region was unforgiving. Scorching heat baked the land during the day. Water was scarce. Food became difficult to obtain. Sand and exhaustion weakened even the strongest soldiers. Thousands died, not in battle, not facing enemy armies, but fighting against nature itself. The losses were heartbreaking. Men who had survived years of warfare collapsed during the march. Animals perished, supplies disappeared. Every day became a struggle for survival. Yet Alexander shared many of the hardships faced by his soldiers. Ancient accounts describe moments when water was brought to him while the army suffered from thirst. Rather than drink alone, he reportedly poured it onto the ground in front of his men. The gesture became legendary. It reminded the army that their king was willing to suffer beside them. Even so, the cost of the campaign was becoming impossible to ignore. The empire had expanded beyond imagination, but expansion had demanded sacrifice. Lives, families, years. Entire generations had been shaped by Alexander's ambitions. When he finally returned to the heart of his empire, he faced a different challenge. Not conquest, governance. His territory stretched across vast distances, Countless cultures, languages, traditions, and peoples now existed under a single ruler. Keeping such an empire together would be harder than conquering it. Alexander understood this. He encouraged cooperation between different populations. He appointed local leaders to positions of authority. He attempted to create bonds between Macedonians and Persians. Some supported these efforts. Others strongly opposed them. Tensions continued to grow among parts of the ruling elite. The empire looked powerful from the outside, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to appear. Still, Alexander remained restless. Even after years of conquest, his mind turned toward new plans, new campaigns, new frontiers, new worlds beyond the ones he already controlled. The dream that had driven him since youth had never truly disappeared, and that dream would follow him all the way to Babylon, where, unexpectedly, fate was preparing its final move. By 323 BC, Alexander had achieved what few people in history had ever accomplished. He had built an empire stretching from Greece to the borders of India. He had defeated the Persian Empire, founded cities across continents, changed the course of civilizations, and become the most famous man of his age. Yet despite everything he had gained, Alexander was only 32 years old. Most rulers spend decades building their legacy. Alexander had done it in little more than a decade, and he was not finished. Back in Babylon, the heart of his vast empire, Alexander began making plans for the future. New military campaigns were discussed. New territories appeared on maps. Some accounts suggest he was considering expeditions deeper into Arabia and beyond. Even after years of war, his ambition remained alive. The horizon still called to him. But fate had been quietly catching up. Then, suddenly, everything changed. In the summer of 323 BC, Alexander fell ill. At first, it did not seem unusual. Campaign life had exposed him to countless hardships. He had suffered wounds, exhaustion, disease, and extreme conditions before. This time was different. His condition worsened. Days passed. The fever grew stronger. His generals gathered anxiously around him. The man who had survived countless battles was now fighting an enemy no army could defeat: time. Ancient sources disagree about the exact cause of his illness. Some suggest disease. Others proposed complications from old wounds. Legends and rumors emerged almost immediately. But one fact remained certain: Alexander was dying. As news spread through Babylon, uncertainty filled the air. An empire held together by one extraordinary individual suddenly faced a terrifying question. What happens when that individual is gone? The answer was not clear. Alexander had conquered the world, but he had not clearly prepared the world for his absence. As his strength faded, soldiers reportedly passed by his room to see him one final time. Many had followed him for years. They had crossed deserts, rivers, mountains, and battlefields together. Now they watched their king slipping away. The conqueror, who had seemed unstoppable, looked painfully human, weak, silent, mortal. Then, at the age of 32, Alexander died. Just like that. No final battle, no glorious last charge, no dramatic conquest. The man who had spent his life outrunning limits could not outrun death. His passing shocked the ancient world. Almost immediately, questions emerged. Who would inherit the empire? Who would control the armies? Who would rule the territories stretching across 3 continents? No simple answer existed. And soon, Alexander's generals began competing for power. The empire he had built through years of conquest started to fracture. Territories divided. Alliances shifted. Wars followed. The unity Alexander had created proved difficult to maintain without him. Yet something remarkable survived: his legacy. The cities he founded continued to flourish. The cultural connections he created transformed entire regions. Greek ideas spread across vast territories, mixing with local traditions and shaping the future of countless societies. More than 2,000 years later, historians still debate his achievements. Was he a visionary? A genius? A conqueror driven by endless ambition? Perhaps he was all of those things. Alexander spent his life chasing the edge of the world, and in many ways he reached it. But the greatest twist of his story is this: he conquered more land than almost anyone in history, yet the one thing he could never conquer was time itself. And in the end, time claimed Alexander the Great just as it claims us all. His empire vanished, his armies disappeared, his palaces crumbled, but his name survived. and that may have been the victory he wanted most.